here's a picture of Europa. Ignore that click to add title up there. Let's get that out of the way. There we go. No. Come back picture. Whatever. Ignore the click to add title. Okay. So, this is Europa. That said, this is a slightly enhanced picture of Europa. If you were to actually fly by it and look at it with your eyes, it would look a lot more like this picture on the left. So there's a sort of shiny white color to the surface of Europa. Can anybody figure out what this shiny white color could be? What is the surface of Europa mainly made out of if it's this shiny white color? You guys can get this. It's ice. That's correct. It is ice. So Europa is completely, its entire surface is made out of ice, and it seems to be essentially dirty with some other type of substance. We are not 100% sure what that other kind of substance is, but it's probably not a very unusual surface. It could just be, silicates and iron. Which might be why it looks a little bit rusty in this picture. But again, this is they're enhancing the dirty parts to make them more visible in the image. Somebody asked if the name for Europa comes from Europe. The name for Europa comes from the same place it comes from the same word base that Europe comes from. So Europa is not named after Europe, but I believe they're both named after the same thing. All of the moons of Jupiter are named after mythological figures. So Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto. There's a bunch of other ones. And remember, Jupiter is the Roman name for Zeus. And the only way I can sort of say this in a politically correct kind of way is that all of the moons of Jupiter are named after people and gods that Zeus had relations with, if that makes sense. And if you remember, Jupiter has over 60 moons, so Greek mythology is a little messed up. That's what I'm saying. Interesting thing, none of the moons of Jupiter are actually named after Zeus's actual wife, so, I don't know about that. So, anyway, that's where the name comes from. Somebody asked, another question about the environment here, but I'm going to touch on that in a little bit, okay? So, check this out. Here we go. So it's covered in ice. What kind of ice? Water ice, okay? You could probably lick it and be reasonably sure that you're going to be fine licking Europa. I wouldn't go lick Europa. It's dirty ice, but you probably could. Now, that said, again, what do you not see on the surface all over the place that we would expect to see all over a moon? What's missing on Europa here? We're missing something on Europa also. Craters, yeah. Craters are also missing, right? So that means there must be geological activity here, but we don't expect it to be regular volcanoes, because what would regular volcanoes do to all of this ice on the surface? If you had a bunch of volcanoes going off, erasing craters, what would that also do to this ice? Yeah, it would just melt all that ice. So there must be something else going on here, some other kind of geological activity that can get rid of these ice. Now, check this out. Okay. What we believe is going on is that underneath all of this ice, is a water ocean, a saltwater ocean, just like we have on Earth, okay? So, all over the entire moon. So we basically kind of think that Europa is like the North Pole on Earth, just all the way around. In fact, that makes it probably the most Earth-like place in the entire solar system, okay? Now, why is that important? Well, and also, how can we be so sure that there's probably an ocean under there? Well, if we zoom in really close onto the surface, we see that it has a bunch of crisscrossed lines on it. So this is like a zoomed in picture of that ice. And you can see these lines crossing all over the place on here, okay? And for most of the surface, that's what it looks like, okay? But there are a few places where instead of looking like this, it looks more like this, okay? Now see the difference. Let me go back to the other picture. If we look at this, and then this one kind of looks like it's been broken apart, okay? It kind of looks like it's been broken, like the surface is broken right here. So essentially what's happening here is that when in the more, every once in a while, like in a summertime condition, what happens to ice? What happens to ice in the summer? Don't overthink this. What happens to ice in the summer? It melts. Yes, it melts. But it's cold enough here, just like at our North Pole, for the ice not to completely melt. So what's happened here is during a particular warm time, this area partially melted and formed icebergs. And with these sections, like this one right here, let me move myself over a little bit, like this right here, this melted and moved over a little bit and then refroze when it got cold again. So essentially, we know that there's an ocean underneath here because we see evidence that the surface has broken apart, formed icebergs, and moved around before refreezing. And that wouldn't work if there wasn't water underneath to float around on, okay? So yeah, it's very much like the North Pole. So what kind of geological activity do we have? It's a little bit weird. So let me bring up my document cam and hope that it's working. Please, document cam, I believe in you. There we go. There we go. Okay, so here we go. What's going on on this moon? Check this out. Okay, so let me talk about Earth for one quick second. On Earth, make sure I'm in the right zone. Here we go. Earth. Yes, hello. Sorry. Watch out. Sorry, guys. We have a visitor. Say hello. I'm streaming right now. Excuse me. Okay. Sorry about that. She's trying to talk to me. So on Earth, we have a crust. So that's our crust. And then underneath that, we have the asthenosphere. And then underneath that, we have the rest of the mantle. And we talked about this when we were talking about Mars. If we have a hot spot right here, so hot spot, that's going to cause the magma right here to heat up and rise. And then it will slowly melt a hole through the surface right here and form a volcano on the surface when it solidifies. As the molten lava solidifies on the surface, every time it erupts, you get a bigger volcano. We talked about that before. So what's happening on Europa? Okay, Europa. As I said, we've got a layer of solid ice. Underneath that, we've got an ocean. And if you go deep enough, you're going to have an ocean floor made out of rock. So I'm just going to put rock down here. And check this out. Here we go. If we look over here on Earth, we've got solid, liquid, solid. And if we look on Europa, we've got solid, liquid, solid. Even though the layers are made of different stuff, the pattern is the same. So what's going to happen if we have a warm spot right here in this rock? Let's say there's a warm spot right here. That's going to heat up this water right here. And what will that hotter, warmer water want to do in that situation? What's the warm water going to want to do? Yes, it'll rise. Just like the hot magma wanted to rise, the hot water is going to want to rise. And if we allow that to happen, the warm water will hit this ice, and that warm water will slowly melt its way through that ice. And it's cold out here, so it will solidify in a pile around the hole. It flows out and solidifies around the hole. And the more warm water that comes out and solidifies, the bigger this pile's going to be. So what are we making right here? What did we just make? What has Europa got right here? That's a volcano, right? That is a ice volcano. It's like kind of like a slushy machine, and it will have eruptions like a geyser, okay? So technically what this is called is a cryovolcano. Cryo, that's C-R-Y-O, volcano. And this is crazy to me, and I love this. I love this thing. Ice volcanoes. That's nuts. We don't really think of there being ice volcanoes, but this place is covered with them, okay? Ice volcanoes. And I mean, that name, if any of you guys play video games, this should be familiar to you guys. Do you guys know what cryo means? What does cryo mean? Like if you got a video game and you got like a cryo gun or a cryo cannon, that's an ice gun, right? So a cryovolcano is just a fancy way to say ice volcano, right? And so if we look on the surface of Europa, there's lots of patches that are much smoother than the rest. And essentially what's happening is that the ice volcanoes are able to erase a lot of the craters. And there's evidence, if we look at those crisscrossed lines, let me see if I can get this back up. If we look at those crisscrossed lines in the ice, those are stretch marks in that ice. So that tells us that not only does it have volcanoes, it has a form of plate tectonics in that ice, okay? So Europa is very active. And we said that Earth was the only planet with plate tectonics. This doesn't break that because this is a moon, right? So Earth still is the only planet with plate tectonics in our solar system, but this moon seems to have it in its ice. Now, do we think that Io is as hot inside as is Europa as hot inside as Io? Is Europa as hot inside as Io? Probably not. So it's hot enough to have these ice volcanoes, but it's not hot enough to have regular volcanoes going off. And there's a pretty simple reason for this. The reason that Europa is able to stay at least a little bit warm inside is also because of the tidal forces of Jupiter. But what must be happening? Why does Europa not get as much tidal effect as Io? Why does Europa not get as much tidal heating as Io? There's a pretty simple reason for it. Yes. Yes, that's correct. It's just further away, okay? It's further away. So because Europa is further away from Jupiter, it doesn't get stretched as much as Io, so it doesn't get as hot inside, so it's able to have this kind of activity, but not the extreme activity of Io. Right. One last thing I want to say about Europa. It's very, 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 very similar to an Earth environment. And because of that, we've been very, very careful. Even though we could easily do it, we have never landed a probe on this particular moon. Okay? Can anybody figure out why? Why would we want to be careful? If this environment is so similar to Earth, what is there a slight possibility that what might possibly exist in this ocean if it's so similar to Earth that we would want to be very careful with? Life. That is correct. Life. Okay? So if there is life in our solar system other than on Earth, it's probably here. We have no direct evidence that there is life here yet. And I'm not saying that there's going to be things like fish or anything like that. I'm talking about sort of like microscopic possible life, like bacteria. And we don't want to contaminate it before we know it exists. So we're actually planning missions to very carefully test this ocean out in order to figure out if there's life here. And if there is, we'll be able to find out within our lifetimes. Does that make sense? So I expect us to know if there's bacteria living on this moon in our lifetime. Sorry, my cat is being very uncooperative today. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. Everybody okay? I'm going to have to get her. Come on, get down. Get down. Yeah. Okay, whatever. That's good enough. Good enough. Okay, everybody all right?